Oh, I expected something more dramatic to happen. Okay, looks like people are coming in. Welcome, welcome. We'll give it a couple minutes to make sure we get everybody. This is always the moment when I feel like we should have included a soundtrack that was a little longer than the beautiful gonging in Helen's background there.
I tried to mute it.
No, I like it. It was our background noise. And now it's just me filling air with sounds. Okay. Helen, I have made you a co-host. Are you able to see the chat?
I am.
Excellent. Right.
So it looks like someone would like to know how they can access the recording after today's session. And we will be posting a link on our website and communicating with everybody who signed up for the webinar.
We have about half of the registered attendees here. So if folks don't mind, we'll wait just a couple more minutes. Get everyone in. And thank you to Adam for posting the caption link in the chat. If folks would like to use an additional caption feature beyond what Zoom has here at the bottom of your screen, you can go to the link that Adam posted and see a live transcript of this webinar. What do you think, Ingrid? Should we give it another minute? Okay, let's go.
Do it.
All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are using the Zoom webinar feature. So you can use the Q&A window or the chat option to send us questions throughout the session. We'll do our best to answer those intermittently as we go, or if you have a really personal question and you want to contact the grants team about your particular situation, you can always email us afterwards. I also want to say welcome and thank you to our access service providers, Jasmine, Amanda, and Adam, who are here to provide transcripts and ASL interpretation. So thank you both for, or all three of you, for being here. You can pin their video. I have enabled multi-pin, so hopefully you'll be able to see as many of the speakers and interpreters as you'd like at a time, as well as the slideshow. And again, in the chat, we have the link to the transcript if you'd like to use that as well. We're also recording this session, and we will make the recording available with an English and Spanish transcript shortly after the session concludes. And if there's anything else that we could provide to support your access to this material, please let us know by emailing us at grants@rac.org. We're going to mention that email address more than once today, but I'll put it in the chat. So it's right there. That's how you can contact us. All right. I think that's my slide.
Hello, everybody. I'm Helen. I'm going to introduce the team to you shortly here, but I want to make sure if you're here today, you registered for this is an overview of Make, Learn, Build grant for the Regional Arts and Culture Council. And we're going to be doing this one time for rounds 3 and 4. So we're going to meet the folks who you're going to be talking to and interacting with should you choose to apply. We're going to give you just a brief overview of the Regional Arts and Culture Council, very brief. We are going to go through the Make, Learn, Build guidelines and the grant applications. We're going to discuss opportunities for support. Now, for those of you, we were able to see who was coming in. The webinar feature sends us your registration. So we know that there are a lot of folks who watched or who attended the first info session that we did for rounds 1 and 2. There are some new things that we're going to be highlighting today. And some of these changes are based on feedback that we received from applicants, recipients, and our community reviewers. So be paying attention to those things, but mostly it's going to be pretty similar. So let's go. Leading you through this today with our very dated headshots. If you're in theater, you know what I'm talking about. My colleague Ingrid Carlson is the primary Make, Learn, Build colleague. If you have interacted with us up to this point, you know that Ingrid is likely the person who's been catching the draft reads and giving feedback on concepts and those kinds of things. As we get more people in the pipeline, you'll be interacting with Molly and myself as well. So hi, Ingrid. We also have my colleague Molly Gray up at the top. Molly's already spoken. And we did together rounds 1 and 2. So we're all pretty well versed on how to support you through this process. So we work at the Regional Arts and Culture Council. This is the 501c3 not-for-profit that serves artists, arts professionals, arts organizations, and K-8 schools in Clackamas, Multnomah, and Washington counties. Our mission is to enrich communities through arts and culture. And you can find out more about us at the RAC website, rac.org. This particular grant is available and designed to address the many ways the arts community needs support as we get through the pandemic. So we designed this expressly for the lockdown period where folks were really not able to get out and create work and do collaborative work. So we're inviting, we're going to keep with it. We just decided that it was the times were too vague to move back into the space of project grants and professional development. So we're on board for another 2 rounds of this. And we don't really know what's going to happen after round 4, but we will give you plenty of notice. So if you have something that you're ready to go with right now, this is the opportunity to apply for RAC funding. We're inviting artists, creative arts organizations, and arts-based businesses to apply. We have the 3 categories, the Make, the Learn, and the Build. We have 3 levels of support now, which we're going to talk about. And we have 2 upcoming due dates, which we will let you know probably more than once during this presentation.
All right.
I think I'm moving on, right? Somebody else taking over?
You can throw the mic to me. Okay, thank you, Helen. So just a little bit more about Make, Learn, Build. You know, as Helen was saying, this is our 3rd and 4th rounds of this grant. So we did offer Make, Learn, Build last year, but there are a few adaptations that we've made based on your feedback. I'm going to put the Make, Learn, Build guidelines link in the chat, which you can download, bookmark, refer to as often as your heart desires. But we'll go through it together. So make, there are 3 categories where you can apply: make, learn, and build. 1, make. This is for supporting the creation of work in any discipline. You can also apply for learn, akin to professional development. This is skill building, our course that you might want to take, some sort of engagement with a mentor or an instructor, all fall into the learn category. And then build is an investment in your operation or business, which could be purchasing equipment, hiring a team, doubling down on your infrastructure with contractors, whatever it needs, whatever you need to take your practice to the next level. And we hear a lot from folks that they don't know which category to apply in because their opportunity includes some make, some learn, and some build, or some combination of those. And the guidance that we frequently give to folks, or always give to folks if they ask that question, is consider what the primary chunk of your grant request is paying for. Are you spending almost all of the money on making work, but you also need to take a one-off Excel class or something to support your opportunity? You're still spending most of the grant funds on the creation of work. So that would put you in make, even if you would be learning something alongside. So when you look at your budget, if you're confused about category, consider where you'd spend most of the funds, but also feel free to email us and we can discuss. And something that we also like to share with folks, and we'll get more into this as we go through the grant questions, but particularly in Learn and Build, this is an opportunity to purchase infrastructure for your business, invest in your own professional development. But one of the questions in the application is also going to ask you to consider how that investment in yourself or your entity ripples out into the community, what that impact is, who has access to what you do with that new skill or new piece of infrastructure. So we can talk more about that later, but just something I wanted to put on your brains as we get started. Ingrid, I think the next one is
eligibility. So Molly put a link into those guidelines, and I think it's great that you're all here to watch the webinar, learn more tips and tricks for the Make, Learn, Build grant. But I encourage you all to go and read the guidelines before you begin your application. The eligibility we're going to cover is directly in the guidelines on page, I believe it's page 2 and page 3. So the first eligibility criteria is your legal address must be in the Tri-County region. Just to remind you, we are the Regional Arts and Culture Council that serves Multnomah, Clackamas, and Washington County, and your legal address needs to be within those 3 counties. The funding that supports our grants comes from our governmental jurisdictions, and the money needs to go back out to artists and arts organizations and arts businesses headquartered there in our service area. So the second eligibility criteria is you need to provide RAC with a W-9 form. Grant awards are income. And so if you receive a grant, part of filling out your paperwork is turning in that W-9 form. That's where we verify where your legal address is. Please note that you will receive a 1099 NEC, I think that's non-employee compensation, at in the end of January if you receive a grant within a calendar year. So you need to be thinking about that and preparing for that from the get-go, from the application stage. Third eligibility criteria, you have to be up to date with all your grant reporting. We have made this this eligibility criteria that if you have an open project grant or an open professional development grant, you can apply to Make, Learn, Build in a different category. So if you are, if you still are working on a project grant, and believe me, everything has been delayed during the pandemic, things just are taking longer than anticipated, so many projects have been put on hold. If you have an open project grant, you cannot apply and make, but there may be an opportunity to learn or an opportunity to build that you are eligible to apply for. The same goes for professional development. There's some folks out there who have open professional development grants. You are still welcome to come into RAC and apply for a MAKE grant. So there's some flexibility there if you have been supported by RAC, but your opportunity, your grant funded opportunity is on hold. With all that in mind though, you can only have one Make, Learn, Build at a time. It is great that folks got funded in rounds 1 and rounds 2. We supported hundreds of grantees and folks are starting to turn in their reports. Once your final report is in for a Make, Learn, Build, you are eligible to apply for another Make, Learn, Build. And it can be in that same category, but only one open at a time. So get in that paperwork. You're gonna hear me say that more than once today. So again, in the guidelines, we have funding restrictions. I encourage you all to read that, and I'm going to zip through them as quickly as I can. Please, no projects or activities that have already been funded by RAC. That means if you are working on a project, if you've got a MAKE grant for your film, you've done all the production, RAC has made that investment in your film project, you can't come back to RAC for that same film project to do your final post-production, color correction, and do the screenings with the festivals. You can come to RAC for your next film project, but not a project that's already been supported by RAC. That also includes mural projects that are supported by our mural program or other past events with project grants. Please, one investment of RAC funds at a time. But the flip side is you can come to us for other support, new projects all the time. Please, number 2, no applications for one activity from multiple applicants. If you are working with other collaborators on a project, please come in on one application with the lead artist or the organization applying. We love to see multiple people involved in projects, but we don't want to see 2 applications for the same project. Number 3, no funding for tuition, for degrees or certificates. The RAC Make, Learn, Build grant is not a scholarship for your BFA, for your MFA, for a certificate that is an investment of multiple classes or programs. And in addition, it's not intended to support student work. Students can apply for a Make, Learn, Build to support their artistic practice, but students should not be applying for funding to support student work. But anybody can apply to take a workshop, to take a class, to help support their learning opportunities, to attend a conference, as conferences are happening online, or even at this point in person. You can ask for funding to pay for a mentor, to work with a consultant. There are lots of learning opportunities. We just don't want to see grants being applied for to get a degree or certificate. If you got questions, email grants@rac.org. No general operating support organizations as applicants. If you're a GOS organization, you know who you are, and you are not eligible to apply for Make, Learn, Build. But we love to see all the arts organizations that are part of our GOS program be involved in projects. So feel free to partner. If you are an artist or another organization, you can partner with one of our general operating support orgs to host or to help with marketing or support your opportunity. No schools, school districts, or PTAs. Again, Make, Learn, Build is intended to support artists and arts organizations and arts businesses. But if you're an artist working in a school, working with youth, you are welcome to apply for that work you're doing. We want to fund you directly. No applicants with past due reportings. Yes, finish that paperwork. It feels so good, and it'll make you eligible to apply again. No legal address does impact available funding. We just want to be clear and upfront. Like I mentioned, those sources of fundings come from Washington, Clackamas, Multnomah County, from the city of Portland, and we do have a little bit of funds that we can use from Metro and the Oregon Arts Commission, help support our grant programs. The funding that comes has to go back out to those counties. So the money from Washington County goes back out to artists and organizations headquartered there. Same with Clackamas County. We do our best to leverage, to grow those pots of money. So because we've always seen, but it continues growth in the counties that are applying. We want to be upfront. We did have some challenges in our last round of Make, Learn, Build with funds that were budgeted in the counties. We spent all that money before we were able to fund everybody who did well through the process. So my yes to this is advocate for more arts funding. Continued support, especially in the counties, is going to really help the entire region. All
Ingrid,
right. Oh, yes.
we have a question.
Oh.
Doing my job. The question is, so an artist that lives in Vancouver but works primarily in Portland isn't eligible, ?
No, I'm sorry. Vancouver is not part of our service area, and your legal address where you pay taxes determines if you are eligible to apply for a RAC grant. Now you can work with an artist who is applying, who is eligible, who's headquartered here, can work with a Vancouver-based artist or collaborators from anywhere in the world, but the applicant needs to be part of our eligibility criteria in our service area. Okay, back to my funding restrictions. Nobody on the RAC team or our board of directors can apply. That just means everybody else is eligible who's in our service area. No late applications. The deadline for round 3 is October 6th by 5 p.m. The online system is programmed. You got to get it done by 5 so that it gets into the system. As soon as after that time frame, it's very tricky to get applications in. You have to work with a staff member, and I tell you, I have already moved on to the next stage, and I will move your application into round 4, which due date is at the end of January. So please, no late applications. Get your applications in early, and we will review you in a future round if possible. And then the last funding restriction is about our new 5,000 level of funding request. Based on that feedback, the first 2 rounds we offered $1,500 grants and $3,000 grants. As the world is opening back up and opportunities are expanding, we're allowing applicants who are paying multiple people and investing in a venue as part of their project to apply at the $5,000 level. However, if you are an individual artist and you are working on the opportunity as a solo project, or you're applying in Learn Build, you are not eligible to apply. The $5,000 level is intended, and it explains this pretty in the guidelines, is intended to support those projects that are in Make that involve multiple artists. So you're paying other people as part of your opportunity, and you need to rent a venue as a critical part of the development and distribution of your project. I don't know, what else am I missing? Helen, Molly, what else do people need to know about $5,000 level? Seems pretty straightforward, but if you have questions, make sure that you email grants@rac.org.
Ingrid, are you able to hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Okay, Zoom is really mad at me and the windows have all gone away and I'm not sure if I'm still with you, but it sounds like I am.
You're
So
here.
maybe we can pause for a moment on the last screen, and if people have questions, and I can log out and log back in, because I am not able to see anything other than my desktop at the moment, but I can hear
Molly's
your
in the
lovely
door.
voice.
Okay, let's,
Okay.
I'm gonna head back to funding restrictions. Helen, do you see any questions related to this?
I do. Now, I sent a private message to somebody named Barbara. Barbara, hello, Barbara. Barbara's question had to do with production costs. I lost the question because I didn't realize in the webinar feature when I send a private message, the question goes away. But it had to do with production costs and whether or not costs that were incurred in 2020, but the project is still ongoing. Barbara, hit me up if this is incorrect, but the project is still ongoing, and that's the part they're going to apply for. Could they include past costs as part of the budget?
Yes, you can include past costs, ongoing costs for the larger project in your budget. And then you can show that you've paid for those costs as contributions. We'll be talking about the application, including the budget page, but there is no eligibility requirement for start date and end date. So if you're midstream with your project, just make sure that your application kind of captures that whole scope of the project, and we understand in the budget what's already been paid for and where the RAC grant funds will be going.
Ingrid, we have more questions.
Yes, let's do
Oh,
that.
yay, Barbara, thank you. Okay, then from anonymous attendee, if we're in pre-production on a film, when we're applying, do we need to know where we'd be screening the film? It's just very, very early on in the process.
Yes, and with our transition to Make, Learn, Build, this has really opened up the opportunity for people to apply for funding without the requirement. We used to have with project grants a requirement of a public presentation, and now I would encourage you in your application to say we'll be applying to festivals, but you don't have to have that nailed down. You do have requirements. We'll cover this on another slide about acknowledging RAC, but there are ways to do that with notifying your community instead of doing a full screening.
Got another question, Ingrid.
All right, one more question, then we're going to Molly.
Oh, wow. Well, the questions have just poured forth. So don't forget that we're going to get a stockpile. So Rachel wants to know what counts as an arts organization. This is a very good question for this moment in time, by the way. Our nonprofit does all sorts of arts classes and workshops, but we're not limited to that.
So I'd say we don't determine whether you're an artist or not. That is part of you stepping forward and saying, I am an artist. Anybody can apply who's an individual artist. I'd say it's the same for an arts organization. If you have arts in your mission and as part of your programming and feel like you identify as an arts organization, then please fill out your eligibility profile as an arts organization. If you go into the eligibility profile and you check the box for as a other nonprofit, then that's you saying that you're not an arts organization and you will not be able to apply for Make, Learn, Build because it won't show up in your open programs. We're working really hard not to put our definition of arts organization onto you. You need to step forward and say, we are an arts organization that uses arts critically in our programming. All right, Molly, can you see what's going on?
Some of it. I can see half of the screen that you're sharing. I can see our video boxes, but I cannot see the chat, participant lists, or anything else. So I apologize. I am not able to see the Q&A or the panelist chat. So if anyone needs any tech assistance, I'm sorry, you'll have to direct those inquiries at someone else. But I hopefully can see enough to fulfill my timeline obligations with this lovely animated slide. Okay, so the big green arrow is the process to get the money. You are going to go online to rac.org/apply and submit your grant request no later than October 6th at 5 p.m. The grants team, that's Helen, Ingrid, and myself, will review the applications to make sure that you're in the right make, learn, or build. There's a possibility that we'll look at it and have a different interpretation. We might reach out to you and say, hey, this actually looks like a learn instead of a build. We're going to pop you over into that group so that you'll be paneled with similar type applications. We'll also be checking for eligibility. And if we have any concerns, we can reach out to you. And I'll show you in another slide where you can adapt your eligibility profile if you're realizing that you might have filled it out incorrectly based on what Ingrid just shared. And then the next step to get the money, our community panel reviewers will get in there. They will read your applications and submit their scores online. We will talk in detail about our community panel reviewers a little bit later, but know that we will be holding the panels. The panels are closed, but we can offer feedback. The panel meetings will be happening in late October and early November. And then I've lost the screen. I can't see anymore, but I'm assuming Ingrid has clicked the button to show you the next slide, which, if I remember correctly, says that we will make the award, we will apply the grant based on funding available, and we will make the awards and notify all applicants by late November for round 3. This info session is intended to be somewhat evergreen for round 3 and 4. So you'll be looking at a different timeline for round 4, but you can find that on our website, rac.org/grants. Did I miss anything that's on that slide, friends?
Good job.
Great. Okay, so this is a screenshot from the RAC Opportunity Portal. This is the online system where you will submit your application. This is what it looks like. I've just logged in as myself or my applicant account. So you can see, based on the way I filled out my profile, I am eligible for the Make, Learn, Build grant. Of course, I am not because I work at RAC, but this is my test account for screenshot purposes. You can see the 2 deadlines. The one highlighted in red is for round 3, and below that is for round 4. You would go ahead and click apply. It'll take you to the application, fill out whatever you need to do. But if you find yourself not seeing the Make, Learn, Build grant opportunity, perhaps you need to adjust your applicant profile. You go into the upper right-hand corner where you see your name and click on that. You'll get an option for account, and then you can update things like your address, super important, your contact information, super important, your eligibility based on your address or your entity type. And that's where you can do that. So if you're not seeing basically this screen when you log in, then you need to go ahead and check your profile. But this is what it should look like.
Okay, so we're gonna do a quick coverage of the grant application itself. What to be thinking about as you get in and fill out your proposal in the online system. So there's only 4 questions. Number 1, describe your project, activity, or opportunity. And then, this is important, include who or what is involved, when and where it will take place, the timeline, and any other information, including scope or details that you feel is important. This is your kind of sort of paragraph that summarizes what your opportunity is. You have 1,000 characters to do it, including spaces, and you want to kind of paint the picture of what is happening and the logistics of how it's going to happen. The one piece that I'm seeing in a lot of drafts that's missing is the timeline. And I just encourage you to kind of outline your steps for the project happening, what months you anticipate those happening in, or kind of a just information that lets us know whether it's a project or a make or a learn or a build, how you're going to go through making it happen. And you know, fill that space with information about the activity. Pretty straightforward. The second question is, who are the key artists, collaborators, community partners, or service providers? What are their roles and why did you select them? The second half is the piece that people tend to miss. You're kind of explaining who is on your team to help make this opportunity happen and what's important about that. Why are they the right people to fit in on your project? The thing to think about when it comes to build in particular is you can list your vendors. Let's say you want to buy a kiln. Your opportunity is pretty straightforward. It's purchasing equipment. You can still talk about the research you did on where you want to buy that kiln, why it's the best kiln to buy, why you selected the vendor to purchase and ship that kiln to you. So, you know, provide us that background for all the pieces as part of your opportunity. We do have this caveat for individual artists with solo proposals. There are projects where you are working alone in your studio to make, learn, or build. You can use the space to kind of describe that opportunity as part of your ongoing practice as an artist. But I will say, I don't know, 80% of the time, there are other people, other companies, other collaborators, other communities involved in your project. And you want to kind of speak to the panelists about how those people are, how you're interacting with them, how they're supporting you in the project, and moving it all forward. The third question is a slight rewording. So this is new to people who are coming back. How would this opportunity help transition or move you forward at this time? This is speaking directly to how you are using the grant funds to move your practice, move your arts business forward during the pandemic. Thinking about, this has been a time of growth and reflection for a lot of people, and we want to know, how does this make, learn, or build opportunity getting you to that next step in your career, in your operations? Help us understand what the impact of this is on you as the applicant. And then question number 4 is, what is the intended impact of this project, activity, or opportunity on an audience and or the community? There are 2 things to think about in my experience with this. You can talk about your work, the impact, what that the ideas or the themes that you are wrestling with, how that engages with your community, with a community, with an audience. Are you wrestling with some important or interesting or critical kind of sort of ideas that need to be explored? Talk about that. How does your work relate to your community and help bring information or visibility to these ideas or community? The second way to think about impact on an audience in our community is the logistics. How are you going to get your film out to those festivals? You know, specifics about reaching an audience. If you're buying that kiln, what's the intended impact of that, of buying a kiln on the audience or community? Talk about the next body of work that you are going to be creating in that kiln and how that's going to get out to your audiences and community. So impact being both that sort of, why is your work important, but also intended impact being like how it's going to get out there, how your work as an artist or an arts organization gets out to an audience or community. Helen or Molly, anything you want to jump in on the application questions? Any tips?
Oh, go ahead, Helen.
I was shaking my head no, and then speaking at the same time. I would just say that question 4 ended up being a spot that tripped up a lot of folks. And by that, I mean, if you've never thought about the impact of your work on others, you should do that. And just because it's question number 4 doesn't mean it's the afterthought or the last thing you should be thinking about. It ended up being pretty important to the community reviewers because if you'll recall what I said earlier, this particular grant was designed for this moment in time, this very long moment in time. So impact will remain important throughout Make, Learn, Build, impact on yourself as well as impact on others.
Yeah, and I was just going to add that each question allows up to 1,000 characters, including spaces. So they're pretty short, but I would encourage you, I imagine my colleagues are in agreement that you want to use as much of that space as possible. We're not asking for a ton of content, but if you find yourself running out of space, that is maybe more likely to be an issue because they are short application questions. So try to use the whole space and use it wisely. If you find yourself running out, see if there's anywhere where you might have repeated yourself a little bit, or if there's information in the narrative that is actually going to be presented in your budget or your supplementary materials, considering the full application and seeing if you've repeated yourself anywhere to kind of try to find some word count. Hopefully it being short is useful and not burdensome. So yeah, try to use the full space and avoid repetition. That's all I wanted to add.
I think we need a question break, Ingrid and Molly. We're getting quite a queue up of questions. So if you'll permit me to do a few of those, we'll do the ones in the chat in just a minute, but we've got some from the Q&A sheet that I don't want to forget about.
Okay.
So let's see. Anonymous attendee wants to know, as an artist who will be applying as the lead artist for a project that will have collaborators and a venue, is applying for the 5,000 under build valid?
No, you have to apply in the make category in order to have access to the $5,000 level. But I question if you are renting a venue and paying multiple artists, whether build's the right category. So you may want to follow up with grants@rac.org to work through your category.
Okay, next question, easy one. Do we need to be a 501c3 organization or only nonprofit in nature?
No. Go ahead, Molly.
Oh, sure. I just thought we would be like a chorus of no's. No, you can be an individual artist or sole proprietor LLC. You can be an arts-based business. You can be a C6. You can be organized in a wide variety of different ways and be eligible for this grant. This is one of the things that we have adapted for Make, Learn, Build to be welcoming folks who are making art and serving community that are not organized as 501c3s. So get in there.
I just want to say that RAC has always supported folks without 501c3s. We're paying out to Social Security numbers. We're paying out to LLCs. We are set up to do that, and we always have. We just haven't ever really promoted it widely through our project grant program, which was our primary way to fund the creation of work. So now y'all know that's a thing. We're happy to do that. Let's get through a couple more questions. If our organization, I love this question. If our organization is volunteer run, may we include requests for money to pay a stipend to one of our group to do marketing and scheduling, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes, sounds good.
Yeah. And then finally from the Q&A, hi there. Hi, Anonymous. Let's say I'm hoping to use a chunk of funding to hire a photographer to help me document my work. Do I need to have the name of the specific photographer included in my application? What if I don't know yet? That was my dramatic interpretation.
So, eligibility wise, no, you don't need to know your photographer. But competitiveness wise, you should do the research and find the person that you want to work with so you can speak about them under key artists and why you selected them and what they're bringing to this opportunity, so that you know how much you need to pay the document. You know, you've spoken with the photographer. So while you might know you need a photographer, I recommend you plan out your opportunity and then apply, perhaps in round 4.
Okay, this is also an easy one from the chat. Alyssa, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Our arts organization needs some equity, diversity, and inclusion training so we can engage with the BIPOC community and create a safe space for them. Would this grant be appropriate for funding this type of training?
Yes. Consultants, that's great.
And then Grace says, hi, Grace. I know, Grace. Q4 is a tough one. It is. Would a planned gallery show qualify? Refinement of your imagery. I'm thinking of equipment to refine my prop making that would help my imagery. Outreach of resulting work to public.
Yes, I think that's one way. You can talk about how the equipment purchase is going to help you grow your skills, grow your practice, and then the impact on an audience and our community would be, what does refining your props mean? How does that help with the conveying your ideas and conveying your elevate your work to the next level? And you can also, as part of that, say, I have 2 shows scheduled for 2022. I'll be able to take this new level of work out to an audience through X and Y. That's one approach to impact. Okay. I would like to cover the budget and get us ready for the next part of the slides, and then we can do some more questions.
Okay.
So you will answer these 4 questions. You got 1,000 characters for each, but you also need to provide a budget. That's one of the tasks in the application. You're going to list all of your proposal costs. I think you have about 10 lines. You don't have to use them all. You're describing your cost and then the amount. My note here is, you have enough space for clarity of each line item, be specific, and it should reflect what you wrote about in the application narrative. And then you will fill out proposal contributions. The RAC grant request, which you've selected, you do have to type that in. That'll be projected. It'll be either 1,500, 3,000, or for those eligible MAKE applications, 5,000. And then you will list other sources of cash. That could be applicant cash, your own money going into something. That could be other grants. That could be ticket sales. That could be fundraising. You are also welcome to list in-kind support. I'm just going to say, if you don't know what in-kind is, be careful about including it in your budget. It's not required. It can show that you have donated goods or services, but it has to be, if something's being donated in kind, it has to be accounted for in the costs as well. So it's part of your balanced budget. You're welcome to include it to show that kind of support for your opportunity. But if it's confusing, I would stick with the cash. Then you are asked, does your proposal cost equal your proposal contributions so that your budget balances? You have the same amount in expenses listed as the total of your contributions. Then You have the opportunity to upload supplemental materials. You are required to provide your resume or the resume or bios of artists or lead staff people. You will provide work samples to help support sort of understanding what your work is, what's related, if it's related to the opportunity, the make projects that you'll be doing, show work samples that support that. There is no current limit to the work samples, but as it says in the guidelines, please keep in mind, panelists are spending about 15 minutes on work samples to support an application. So think about how much you're providing as a video, as stuff to read, how many images to include. Just kind of be mindful. Sometimes a curated sample is better than too much. You will provide other support documents, and we are continuing to be under the pandemic restrictions. So if you are doing something that engages with the public, please consider COVID safety protocols so the panel knows you're being thoughtful about how you are out in the community. If you have support documentation, can also be a whole range of things, invitations to participate in something. It can be, you know, a strategic plan if that's part of what you're requesting. You are also have the opportunity to upload cost documentation to show your research for those budget line items. Other support documents and cost documentation are not required, but I encourage you to think about what else you have that supports your request that panelists might want to see. All right.
Oh, this is me. Hi again. I get other assignments on top of my reading the chat and the questions. So here's some things to keep in mind. The way to set your mind is, what do I need to sustain myself right now? And that's a good question to ask if you're concerned about how to prioritize. Do you need a make? Do you need a learn? Do you need a build? If you did a make, does it take you into the next space that you might want to be in? Or do you actually need to learn something to get there? Or do you need to build some capacity to get there? So it's just a good question about this moment in time as you're thinking about what's the right concept to go after. You guys animated everything. This is great. The reviews that the community reviewers do are online. Please check your links and passwords and make sure, so links are tricky, you know, check it, but also make sure that the password is accessible for an extended period of time. We had a couple folks that set a limit on how long or with a length of time that a link was available by using a password, and we had to go back out and ask them. So one of the weird things that we experience is that when somebody can't access the supplementary materials, it kind of sends a negative message to them. So even when we do give them access, they're already a little bit like, I couldn't, it wasn't available to me. So don't let that be the case for you. Check and double check what you send. And then make sure that you're paying attention to your emails so that if we're communicating with you, if something has happened, we've had instances where Molly, Ingrid, and myself have tried to reach out to an applicant in order to rectify something, and we weren't able to reach them in a timely manner. So just pay attention and check those things. Give yourself plenty of time. I think that's what that really is saying. Give yourself time. Next. REC does have a conflict of interest policy. So just so you're aware that we have artists reviewing these proposals, and we take conflict of interest pretty seriously. Anybody who has a conflict of interest with an applicant is asked to disclose that, and then they don't review the application and they don't participate in the conversation and they don't score it. So if you have questions specifically about that or concerns about the types of individuals that are reviewing our proposals, you're always welcome to reach out to us. We have a brand new cohort of reviewers that Molly's going to discuss with you when it's her turn to take over the wheel. So just so you're aware, we do practice and we take that work very seriously. Grant awards, by the time the panel does their review, we're taking under advisement the rankings from the panel, the amount of money that we have to give, and the fact that we're really trying to spread this money out into the spaces of underserved communities. And another way to look at that is, where haven't RAC dollars gone? I think it's pretty evident and obvious that there are plenty of artists and arts organizations who regularly receive RAC funding. And there are some also some artists and some arts organizations that have not yet had access. So we are looking at that, and we do take that seriously. And when we go through the review criteria and the way we guide the panelists in the review, you will see where impact and the community served becomes an important part of the evaluation. We do report to our board the recommendations from the panel. That's why it takes us a little while to make sure that you hear from us, but we are keeping our board of directors. They do review the process and help us make sure that we're being transparent about what it is we're doing in terms of awarding funds. Oh yes, here we go with the email again. We can't say this enough times. We do notify by email, so make sure that you are making our email or the email that comes from SurveyMonkey apply, that you are giving that access in your email, that you're checking your junk or your spam email regularly. And if you're concerned that you haven't heard from us, don't hesitate to reach out, but we also do post the recipients online. And so that will be available on our website. I don't recall how long it took us to get that up, but it seemed to be within a week of notification. Our goal is to notify the applicants first. And also we do try to notify pretty quickly because we have another round coming up and we want you to come back if you didn't receive funding. We want you to get feedback and come back.
I just want to add, Gmail seems to send our emails into the promotions folder. So make sure you're checking promotions, junk folder. When we say we're going to notify you by November 30th, we will notify you by November 30th, but I can't promise your email isn't blocking us. And then you can also always log into your account in the RAC opportunity portal and see the status of your application.
Is this me?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay. Should I
Grouping.
apply as an individual or as an organization? It's up to you. And this is a great conversation to have with a RAC team member if you're concerned. It depends on how you would like to be paid. Some businesses were happy to pay out to a business, LLC, as I've said, or an EIN number. But if you don't want us paying out to your social security number, to your personal identifier, that is something to consider. Ingrid, do you have any? We get all kinds of complicated situations.
Yeah.
Is there anything else?
I'll just say I would encourage you to think about how you're set up in our online system before you apply, because it can quite delay payment if you decide, oh, I don't want to be paid out as an individual. I want it to go through this fiscal sponsor. Let's figure that out now so that we're not delaying you getting the money because of paperwork.
How important is the category that I apply for or in? The same reviewers are reviewing in all categories. The only reason why you want to give this some consideration is that it's helpful in the reading of the proposals that the people who are reviewing similar proposals. So all the learn are learn. If there's a make stuck into the learns, you know, somebody will chime in and say, this didn't seem like a learn proposal, you know, so it's just, you can determine what it is, you can make the case, but I want to know different things about a learn proposal than I do about a make proposal, right? So the rationale for why you're applying in a particular category does become important, and it is up to you to make the case to the reviewers. Sorry, my bongs, my clock. Go ahead.
We do fund the same % across categories. So you aren't magically getting a better opportunity in make as opposed to build. Apply in the category that suits your opportunity because it's the same funding percentage.
I would also say that we tried to keep the scale of the panels similar as well. So even though we might have had more make than anything else, we were giving the reviewers anywhere between 25 and 35 applications to read. And that was consistent with the learn and the build as well. So we're not overloading any one category. We treat them all as similarly as we can. I'm more likely to get 15, 3, or 5. Make the case. This was what was so awesome about these award amounts. These are artists reviewing these applications, so we didn't, you know, there wasn't any real judgment on whether or not somebody needed it. If you can make the case, if you can make the case for the 5,000, come after 5,000. I don't know that there was any statistical relevance to any of these numbers. Most folks came after the 3,000, which was the top award. And there were some that could have been 1,500, to be perfectly honest with you. And sometimes that gets noticed by reviewers. So I think honesty and having a real true budget that you can stand in front of and behind is what's really important about what the award amount, or what award amount you come after.
One thing that I'll add about award amount quickly is that it's an all or nothing. So if you apply for 3,000 and you are awarded, you're going to get 3,000. We're not doing partial awards in any of those levels. So as Helen was saying, consider what the real crux of your request is, and if that is at one of the lower levels, you're not going to want to fluff it to get to a higher level thinking, oh, well, maybe they'll just partially award me if they don't find this element of my budget compelling. Focus on what the real need is, pick the category that matches you the best, and you'll either get 100% of that request or we'll invite you back another time.
And for the artistic discipline, I would say the same rules apply. Be considerate and apply in the discipline that is most appropriate for you. We are not treating any specific disciplines any differently. And in the case of learn and build, it's less of an issue because there's no, they're not really looking at the art making component of it. They're looking at what you gain from building capacity or from learning a skill. And that tends to cross disciplines much more easily than it does in the make category. Start and end date. So here's the thing, everything changes. The great thing about a start and an end date is it helps the reviewers understand your planning process, and it gives them a window into the scope and scale of your particular concept. If the start date ends up changing, if the end date ends up changing, it's okay. But we do want to look at that to make sure that we understand how you're planning and what what process you're going through and how much time you're giving yourself to work your process. Ingrid, is there Ingrid or Molly, anything else on that one?
I would just say if you're in the middle of a project and it's already started, that's okay. A start date can have passed. It's probably going to be more competitive if your end date is sometime after November 30th, so people can know that you're getting the grant and then finishing your project. It's not going to kick you out of eligibility, but it really does help understand where you're at and where you plan to be by the end date.
Okay.
Can we take a quick break for a few more
Yeah,
questions? We have a lot. Just a few here. So back to the chat, Mark wants to know if requesting a grant that would include paying volunteer staff a stipend, what category of grant would qualify?
Build.
But you could pay someone in make as well. Like if you're making a large body of work and you need to hire an assistant to help you with, say, fabrication or something, you could certainly see volunteer stipends in a category like make or like build. I think it depends on kind of what chunk of your budget it is. But that's if it's a very specific question, you can follow up with us by email.
Okay. This one is a very common question. Thank you, Ashley. Super common. We've already had a version of it. What if you're directing a play and you haven't cast it yet? How would you answer part of the question?
How would you answer the question about key artists? Explain to me your process for what your timeline and what your plan is to have auditions, and how many characters are in your play and what you're going to be looking for when you're casting it.
Okay. Can't see the name on this one. As a painter wanting funding to assist exhibiting, I'm thinking of framing, documentation, writing, editing, ... These are the things I'm wanting assistance for. Whilst, oh, I love that word there, these are other folks I work with. Am I eligible to make the 5,000?
I didn't hear venue rental as part of the expenses you listed out, and you have to be paying for renting a space to either develop the work and show it. I want to talk, don't want folks to try to wiggle their way into the $5,000 request amount. The intention of the $5,000 amount is to support people who are doing larger projects by paying other artists, and to invest in our venues. As the Portland Tri-County area starts to open up, people want to return to the theater, return to concert venues. That is the type of venue we had in mind. So I think everybody here on this call could spend $5,000 on their art making, but we want to make sure that you have access to a larger amount of money if you then are investing in other parts of the arts community through artists and spaces.
Okay, can we do a couple more?
Yeah.
All right. I'm a musician who's also a private music teacher. I'm interested in applying for a build grant to help renovate my studio space in the house my wife and I just purchased. Woo-hoo. I'd use this space for small house concerts, live streaming events, private teaching, group classes, and my own practicing and composing activities. Would applying for a build grant to help with the cost of the renovations and equipment such as lighting, mics, cameras, etc., be appropriate? I'm hoping this would become something the center of my music and music education where I live, outer Southeast, Powellhurst, Gilbert, while also reaching more people virtually via live stream. Sorry.
Yes.
We got a lot of those applications in rounds 1 and 2 and funded some of them. Okay, oh, ADA accessibility, right? Like if you're gonna have people moving in and out of your space, you need to make sure that it is accessible. And our reviewers know to look for these things. So please make sure if you're doing this in an attic space or in a basement space or some space that is not accessible or the main of the house is not accessible, you really do need to be thinking about those things. We are not interested in investing in your studios if people who use mobility apparatus devices are not able to have access to your location. So do think about that as well. Okay, let's see. Oh, I'm getting into some, let's go ahead. I see that there's been a lot of communication. I hope everybody's able to have access to the interpreters. Go ahead, and when we catch up next, I will be going to Pilar. Question, that's next.
All right. So we have mentioned intermittently throughout this process our wonderful community panel reviewers, and I would love to take some time to tell you a little bit more about those folks and how the review process works. So RAC will be working with a cohort of community members who will be seasonal contractors at the Regional Arts and Culture Council to form the review panels for Make, Learn, Build round 3 and 4. These folks are themselves art makers, art teachers, staff or team members at arts organizations, arts-based business owners. They are practicing, engaged in the community. I'm going to pause for just a second because I might have lost the interpreter window and I want to make sure I'm not going ahead without them. But I also cannot see the panelist chat. Oh, okay, great. Hey, thanks. Hi, Jasmine. All right. So our community panel reviewers, as I said, are active in the Tri-County arts community, and RAC is working with them in a cohort model. So hiring them as seasonal contractors, which will allow us to assemble this group that has a breadth of diversity across representation of age, race, geography, artistic experience, discipline, other identities that people are bringing into the space. Instead of forming a panel for each review, we have a cohort that is going to do all of the reviews. So we spend a little more time with the same group of people, excuse me, which allows us to engage them more deeply in the grant review process, including things like an anti-bias training, anti-implicit bias training in advance of their review for work. And it allows us to compensate them at a level that we feel is more accurate and more representative of the expertise that they are bringing in. Instead of a stipend, they are contractors and they're sticking with us for an extended period of time, which allows us to provide a greater level of remuneration. And that also serves to push funding into the arts community. So this might be somebody who has applied for RAC grants in the past, may again in the future, but this is another way for them to engage with us and receive compensation, not just for output, not just the creation of work, but paying for them and their expertise as artists. So we had an amazing group last time around. We're in the final stages of selecting the cohort for round 3 and 4, and I can tell you these are fabulous folks that are going to be reviewing your grant proposals. You know, they're from within our community, which we hope also fosters a greater sense of community ownership over the public funds that RAC is in charge of dispersing. So when we are working with these reviewers, we provide them with really specific criteria that is in the grant guidelines for you to review when they're looking at each proposal. So the first item is we ask them to look at the strength of the concept, including the evidence of planning and proposal clarity. So this can show up in various parts of your application. It can be in your narrative. It can be in your budget. It can be in your cost research. How clear is your plan? How much have you thought it out? Does the panel grasp what you want to do? Do they feel confident that you've put in the legwork to make a solid plan? Number two, the demonstrated capacity of the applicant and others involved to meet the proposal goals. So not only do you have a plan, but are they pretty sure that if you get this money, you're going to get it done? So that can show up through maybe your attached resume or bio. Is this work that you're ready to do? It can show up in your budget. Do you have, an understanding, and have you shared the full scope of what you need to make your project happen? And are the RAC funds able to help push you in that direction? Impact on the applicant. So how is this going to change you, the applicant, whether you're an individual, an organization, or a business? How is this going to change your circumstances? And then also, how is it going to impact an audience or community? These are public funds that we are asking our community reviewers to grant. And so they want to know, how does the public benefit? This is something we've talked about a little bit earlier on, in Learn and Build. Maybe you're purchasing a kiln. That's our favorite example for this webinar. And that's great. It's clearly going to have a big impact on you. And then we're also looking for information about how that purchase and investment in your practice and your infrastructure shows up in other spaces. And it doesn't have to be the whole Portland Tri-County region is going to be massively impacted by your kiln purchase. It could be a specific audience. Maybe that's students that you work with. Maybe, it's a specific community that you invite into your space to use that kiln. Just tell us who they are. It doesn't have to be everyone. And then, of course, does the budget clearly support the requested amount and activity? So does the budget make sense? Is it covering everything you need? Is your project on this scale, but your budget's only on this scale? That's the kind of thing that would give reviewers pause to wonder, does the budget really support that activity, or are there pieces missing? And so those are the 5 review criteria. They're in the guidelines. You can review them. I encourage you to kind of think about them alongside your application as you're getting ready to submit. And we'll be, we talk through each of those in our panel meeting. So hold those close. But there's also another piece that we ask the community panel reviewers to assess. And that is this last question. Is this application important to support as part of RAC's core values? And on the next slide, we'll get to what our full core values are. But this is, the 5 review criteria, they're weighted equally. And then we also weigh this consideration of, is this a opportunity that will have an impact in these specific ways that we are articulating through the core values that support RAC's mission and guide our work? Those are also available to you in the guidelines and on our website. So think about them alongside your application as well, and we'll talk about them right now. Okay, so we use these values and that question in order to try to ensure that our pool of grantees is aligned with the values that RAC is working towards in all of our activities, not just in our grant making, but this is how they show up. So accessibility, inclusion, simplicity, ease. Is this project accessible? There's a lot of different ways you can define that. If that is something that you feel like is a part of your application, try to articulate that in your narrative. Advocacy, visibility, resources, impact. Equity, racial justice, representation in services and investments. Diversity of art forms and artistic traditions. Community, for belonging, support, and connection. And innovation, testing and adapting, finding new ways to deliver value. So you might be looking at these and think, well, okay, so my project is really innovative and I'm reaching a diverse community, but it doesn't really have anything to do with advocacy. That's okay. You don't need to check every single box. There can be one or more of these values that is really strongly showing up in your opportunity or your grant request, and some that might not be relevant. You don't need to tick them off like a list, but know that our reviewers have these in mind and are looking at them while reviewing each opportunity and saying, okay, cool, I get it. The request is clear, meets the criteria, they're eligible. Does this move the pool of funders or the pool of fundees rather, the pool of grantees further in any of these directions, which are central to the values that RAC has articulated. I can't see the chat, so I don't know if there's any questions.
There's tons of questions, Molly, but let's just we're just gonna finish the presentation. I think we're pretty close, and then we're just gonna hit those questions.
Great. Okay. Yeah, we have just a couple more slides and 10 more minutes. You can see on our website, rac.org/about more about our values. All right, over to you, Ingrid, I think.
Yes. All right. So you've applied, your application's been reviewed, you've been notified of your award, you've turned in all your paperwork to claim the funds, and now you're implementing your project. I want you to know that you will be paid the full grant upfront. We implemented this with rounds 1 and 2. It's been going really well, but just remember, you need to turn in your final report in order to be eligible to apply for another grant from RAC. As part of your opportunity, we ask you to acknowledge the funding from RAC with using our logo, a hashtag on social media, something that helps you spread the word to your community. I was funded by a RAC grant. It all helps with advocacy, and you will have to show how you did that in your final report. The other things you'll need to do with your final report are just report out on successes and challenges, what the final budget was, documentation, make sure you bought that kiln, and photos, videos, articles. We accept that information in the final report as well. The last thing I want to say about final reports is you're submitting an application, and that is your best plan for your activity or your project or your opportunity. 99% of them will change. Your timeline will shift. Maybe the kiln costs more money. That's okay. You don't have to have RAC approval for changes like that. That's what the final report is for. Let us know how the actual implementation of your activity finally came about. We believe you, you're going to do it, but it's probably going to be slightly different than your original plan. That's fine. Okay, and the last bullet here is commitment to ADA accessibility. Please think about how you can provide accessible opportunities to the entire community, host your events in ADA accessible venues, provide interpretation for community members. RAC is committed to this, and we want you as a grantee to be committed as well. Helen, I think this is you.
Oh, I'm reading through the questions that we're not getting to.
Well, let me do this. So there are lots of opportunities for RAC support. Email the team. We all get the emails. I'm the lead staff member, meaning that I'm just point person. I'm making sure I'm getting back to folks as quickly as possible. But if you have a relationship with Helen or a relationship with Molly, you can reach out to them directly. That's fine. We're all on board for this program. There is an FAQ, frequently asked questions and answers online. You can find it on the Make, Learn, Build website. We do offer translation services and accessibility needs. If there's anything else you need or you know other community members need in order to have access to the application, access to this grant, please let us know. We want to support you. And here on the right-hand side, grant draft review. Some of the returning grant applicants know we do this, but it is this is the hot news. If you get a draft of your application done in the system before the deadline, and it says here for round 3, the deadline to request this is September 29th, and you email grants@rac.org, I have a draft ready. One of us will get you on our calendar, read your draft, and give you grant writing feedback in a phone call. It's kind of going over the questions, looking over the budget, making sure things line up. It's just an extra set of outside eyes from the RAC grants team perspective. It doesn't guarantee you're going to get a grant, but it does help you feel confident that you've put your best application forward. So if you get something ready to go by September 29th, please feel free to email and take advantage of that. If you don't, I just encourage you to have somebody else in your community read your draft before you finalize and submit. That's the end of the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, are we going till 12:30 or till 1?
12:30.
Okay, here we go. Pilar wants to know, my project requires that I take some classes and purchase equipment. Am I allowed to include these two categories in the budget to get funded, or do I only get funding for the build or learn line items?
I'm not sure. Wait, I'm not sure I understand the question.
I'm not sure if it's a make grant or not. I think it's a make grant. And I think what's being asked is, can I get funding in the make grant for equipment or to take a class? Even though those are separate. That's how I'm reading this question, Pilar. If that's not correct, circle back to us.
Yes, there are definitely make opportunities to create work that include opportunities that otherwise might be in learn and build, like purchasing equipment or taking a class.
Okay.
I think it's back to that. What is the bulk of your budget? What is the bulk of your project? Is it making, learning, or building? And then other little parts can fit under that.
I want to keep going. If we're not answering your question correctly, please circle up with us. This is a good question. When will grants be awarded, and when must the award be spent by? Do you expect to have the same amount of funding available in round 3 and 4?
Molly, you jump in if you need to. Round 3 will be announced by November 30th. You will have an opportunity to claim the funds in early December, or in, we're going to ask people who are doing their activities in 2022 to claim the funds in January. It takes a couple weeks to process funding, so keep that in mind. Even though you might be notified in November, you're not going to have access to the money until all the paperwork is processed. And you'll want to claim the funds based on when you want to receive the money, which is impacted by your own timeline for taxes. I mentioned that at the beginning. Grant funds are income, and you want to be planning for that. There is no end date, but I will keep in mind, the longer you're, you want to sort of be moving through what's next. Plenty of round 3 opportunities will extend into 2022. The applicant sets the time frame. There's no end date on RAC's perspective, and we anticipate we have the same budget as last year, which we spent about $1.1 million in Make, Learn, Build. So it's a very similar budget amount for rounds 3 and rounds 4. We'll spend half of that in round 3, with about $550,000 for round 4. But I do anticipate that the number of applicants might uptick in round 4, because the start of the new calendar year, everybody gets excited to apply for grants.
Okay, Maria in the Q&A says, we are a 501c3 that engages artists to teach arts classes to low-income housing, including residents who are not only low income, but also may have mental health issues. We also have homeless and recently incarcerated. Can we request funds to pay the artists? This feels like a version of another question we had.
The answer is yes. Just make sure that you are identifying as an arts organization in the eligibility profile so that you can apply. Molly, you take the next one.
Harry wants to know, is the studio office considered a venue if you are turning it into a place where people can come visit and see your work?
No, I don't think so. I think a venue is an established, separate from yourself entity who you would be paying to use their space. And again, it kind of goes back to what Ingrid was saying. We added this level as another way to push funds out into the community, because we see need in a lot of spaces. So you're welcome to request funds to remodel your home studio or invest in your home studio, but it would not take you to the level of being a venue for the $5,000 eligibility requirement.
There was a question from the chat about time requirements for when projects need to be completed. Remember, there are no requirements. So I think I've taken care of everything in the chat. I'm going to move back to the Q&A. If we don't have our entire creative team in place yet, but we plan to produce the work before the round 4 deadline, can we apply in round 4 retroactively to pay off any debt accrued?
Technically, that's not an eligibility concern, but it is for sure an impact and competitiveness concern. Please apply in round 3 and do your best in answering question number 2.
My encaustic studio was way too hot to teach in for much of this summer, and I'm interested in adding AC. My studio is attached to my home, so I was hoping to offer to pay the difference for my property that isn't used for business. Does this work?
Yeah.
Thank you for the helpful info. Okay, Jen Tate wants to know, I'll be requesting funds to cover one specific part of a short film. Do I need to include the budget for the entire film or just what the funding will cover?
I've seen these types of projects be successful both as a phase of a film and the budget for the full film. If you can provide the budget for the full film in the additional support documentation, that kind of covers your bases, and have your budget, this is for everybody, have your budget in the application reflect what you wrote about in the narrative. So Jen, if you're writing about the whole project, include the budget for the whole project in the application.
What?
I just want to give us a quick time check. I know
I've got the time check.
Okay,
Folks can leave if they want, but anybody who can we hang and just keep answering questions?
Okay.
Bye for anybody that needs to go, but we've got some really great questions. If I don't receive a grant, will I receive any feedback if there's an opportunity to get feedback?
Yes. Let's all together say yes. You can contact your staff person for feedback.
Okay. Do I need to submit receipts in the final report?
No.
Should projects be completed by the end of the cycle? Like, what if it's ongoing?
You're going to want to have a start date and an end date and a timeline and a scope. So think about the spring phase of your ongoing project, the season that you are applying for, so that your budget and your narrative can reflect a kind of concrete activity.
This is great. We got 3 more questions left, and an anonymous attendee wants to know, can I pay myself a stipend in the mate category? And then very humbly says, this is my first grant app. Sorry, this is a bad question. We get asked this question all the time. It's a great question.
The answer is yes.
Yes.
Yes, artist fees are definitely eligible expenses.
Jamie's asking, can we talk about venues and funding? Do you have any recommendation for venues in the area to check out for arts classes where we can get messy? Jamie, circle up to grants. That seems like a longer to the grant email, which is what, Molly?
grants@rac.org.
It seems like a longer, more messier question that we'd want to get into with you. And Crystal is asking, a collaborator and I are thinking about applying to build the first multi-channel speaker system for community performance use. We have relationships with a number of venues, but the grant will be focused on getting the equipment. We aren't sure which section we might fit into.
Purchase of equipment is build.
Spelled. Crystal, you followed up. If you want to email us and just get more into the weeds on this, we can do that with you. But I too think that it is build. Okay. Did I miss anybody's questions? If you're still one of the 36 people who are still hanging with us, it's 12:34. I think 4 minutes over is brilliant. That's it.
Thank you for attending or watching and hanging till the bitter end.
And this is saved, so you can watch it again and again and again.
Thrilling stuff. All right.
Thrilling
Thanks,
stuff.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would one of my co-hosts end the meeting for us?